You are watching DHTV from California State University, Dominguez Hills.
Ladies and gentlemen, please take your seats. We're going to start the program in just a moment. Please take your seats. All right, folks, let's get started. Thank you so much for joining us this afternoon. Ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon and welcome to the Cal State University Dominguez Hills South Bay Economic Forecast. This is Frank Mottek here from KNX 1070 Newsradio, and it's an honor to be back with you for our annual conversation. I actually lost count on how many times we've done this, folks, but I promised Marilyn McPullen I'd keep doing it until I get it right. So thank you for that, Marilyn. And we have an exciting program for you this afternoon. So thank you very much for attending today. And it's wonderful to be out in the studio and actually see the live audience. And I have to say, you all look much taller in person and louder, too. So thank you for that. And it's been a real pleasure to meet many of you at the reception here this afternoon. As I do every day, of course, been following the news very, very closely, and it's a big week in the financial world, so you picked the perfect week to have this discussion. With the major averages touching record highs this week, we have the Fed policy setting meeting that started today, and they'll be wrapping up tomorrow with a decision on interest rates and the statement on the economy, and then a full-blown news conference from the Fed Chair Jerome Powell. It's widely expected, as many of you know, the Fed will be lowering short-term interest rates for the third time this year. We also have the jobs report coming out on Friday, watching what's happening, of course, with the U.S.-China trade discussions. And Friday, the other big news is November 1st is rolling up, so rent is due. So that's the other big news. Closer to home, Beyond Meat with its earnings news. Of course, that company had a meteoric rise this year and pulled back 20% today. So we saw Beyond Meat stock getting sliced in trading today. And this just in, Mattel earnings coming in better than expected. The stock soaring 20% in after-hours trading. And Mattel, of course, also based in this area, famous for Malibu Barbie, of course. Why not El Segundo Barbie, or Torrance Barbie, right, Mayor? Or Torrance Ken. We have to get to work on that. So let's see what we can do about that this afternoon. We're here to talk technology and innovation and the economy, so you came to the right place. Technology never stands still, folks. In fact, it's accelerating at a staggering rate. Did you know that today's connected devices market is skyrocketing to a projected $14.2 trillion economy by the year 2030? Stanford researchers predict 50 billion connected devices by the year 2020 and 500 billion just a decade later. In addition, the augmented reality, virtual reality market could feasibly hit a $767 billion valuation by the year 2025. So once again, I'm very honored and pleased to be here because, like many of you, I'm eager to learn about the technology advancements in the area of aerospace, e-mobility, and space innovation, and then hear important economic updates that are happening right here in this neighborhood in the South Bay. Today's program will be in two parts. We'll first hear from the economic panel, who will deliver the news you are all waiting to hear, what's next for the economy, and our economists will cover new trends in the economy, employment growth, and access to startup capital here in the South Bay, telework and flexible workplace practices, and the ever-favorite, the local housing real estate market. Then transition to the tech speaker panel, who will discuss advances in innovative technology, an exciting lineup of panelists representing a variety of industries, and we will hear them discuss subscription-based e-mobility concepts. as well as various aviation and space technologies, including aerospace emerging startups and small satellite launch platforms. And following that, we will invite all of the speakers to the stage for an audience Q&A. And lastly, we will end the afternoon, perhaps most importantly, after all this, we'll probably be developing an immense thirst, so there'll be a craft beer and wine tasting reception in the Palm Courtyard below us, where you can taste the local South Bay craft beer flavors of Smog City, The Strand, Dudes, and El Segundo Brewery Companies. That'll be happening at wine o'clock at the conclusion of our discussion here. Ladies and gentlemen, I would now like to acknowledge and gratefully acknowledge the fantastic sponsors who help support this important occasion. Many thanks to our gold sponsors, which include Phillip, yes, Cal State University Dominguez Hills alumna, Ivy and Leo Chu. Thank you. And huge thanks to all of our silver sponsors as well, listed here on the screen. Thank you very much, silver sponsors. And thank you for all of your support of this program. And now I'd like to take the opportunity to recognize the elected officials joining us here this afternoon. From the City of Carson, Mayor Albert Robles, Mayor Pro Tem Cedric Hicks, Councilmember Lula Davis Holmes, Councilmember Jim Deere, Councilmember Jawan Hilton. Please welcome the folks from the City of Carson here this afternoon. From the City of El Segundo, Mayor Drew Boyles. Thank you, Mayor, for your attendance. City of Hawthorne, Mayor Pro Tem Olivia Valentine. City of Linwood, Mayor Jose Solachi. City of Redondo Beach, Mayor Bill Brand and Councilmember Laura Emdee. Thank you. In the City of Torrance, I know Mayor Patrick Fury is here. Mayor, thank you for joining us, along with Councilmember George Chen and Councilmember Mike Griffith. Torrance in the House. City of Lawndale, Mayor Robert Pullen Miles, who's also District Director for Assemblywoman Autumn Burker. Thank you for joining us. And from the Office of Assemblymember Al Muratsushi, Melissa Ramoso. From the Office of Assemblymember Mike Gibson, Moses Aglipe. And from the Office of California Senator Bill Allen, please welcome Olena Wybro. And from the academic world, the president of El Camino College, Dina Maloney. Thank you, Madam President, for joining us. And now we'd also like to recognize Dominguez Hills South Bay Economic Forecast Student Research Competition finalists that are exhibiting in this ballroom today. This year, 4 competition winners were selected, and they are Carolyn Staub, Cheyenne Luna, Joshua Mean, and Jennifer Trim. Please welcome the competition winners. Let's give them all a round of applause, please. And before we dive into the program, folks, I'd like to introduce the host of today's Economic Forecast event, the Provost and Vice President of Academic Affairs here at California State University, Dominguez Hills, Dr. Michael Spagna. And it's a pleasure to welcome and invite Provost Spagna on the stage now to deliver the official welcome on behalf of the university. Please welcome Provost Spagna.
So welcome on behalf of President Thomas Parham. When I moved from Philadelphia out to California about 35 years ago, I blundered into a shop and someone told me I had a radio voice. I'm glad I chose the academic profession because, Frank, you have an exceptional radio voice. Can we have a round of applause for Frank? It's great to see so many representatives from the various businesses and industry sectors here in the South Bay region today. I truly appreciate you taking the time to come and visit with us. If you've had a chance to walk across the campus, great things are happening in the Toro Nation. You'll see buildings on the campus. I'll refer to a couple of those in my brief remarks, but there's no better time to be at this campus. An indicator of this, as we heard earlier about the student research competition, we have the highest head count of students ever in the history of this institution, 17,000 students. We broke that barrier this year. That's an applause line for our university. I want to begin by recognizing our distinguished speakers today who are going to be working with us, and I'm going to ask them to stand briefly as I recognize them. Our own Dr. Jose Martinez, co-director of the CSUDH Economics Institute and associate professor of economics, chair of accounting, finance, and economics department. Jose, if you can rise and receive applause. His co-director of the CSUDH Economics Institute, Dr. Fynnwin Prager, also an assistant professor in the Public Administration Department. And their colleague, Dr. Jennifer Brodmann, associate professor of finance. Jennifer, if you can rise and be recognized. I also want to recognize the organizers. An event like this doesn't come across unless you have a wonderful team, and we have the best team in the entire CSU system. Let me start with Dean Joseph Nguyen, who really made this possible. Joseph Nguyen, if you could please stand and be recognized. And none of it would be possible without Vice President Carrie Stewart, our head of advancement. Carrie, if you could stand and be recognized. And other members of the planning team, if you could please stand for one final round of applause. Anybody on the planning team for today? The South Bay Economic Report produced by UCLA Anderson Forecast will be available online tomorrow. You will have some of these at your tables, but this will be available tomorrow, as you'll hear from the speakers today. As the report will reveal, as our excellent panel will share with you, the South Bay is an influential and vital region in the greater Southern California economy. As you undoubtedly already know, companies within the South Bay represent every major economic engine for this region: healthcare, aerospace, entertainment, transportation, trade, technology, energy, and in many cases, the South Bay is home to the leaders in those industries. One of our most critical resources, of course, are people, first and foremost. Those who are our customer base and your next generation of workers. In the CSU system, we have historically been about access. We are now about access and completion. But really, when we talk about what's necessary in our area, our region, we need students that have access, they're able to complete their degrees, and they're able to thrive. And that's what we're committed to here at Dominguez Hills, ensuring that our students are job resilient and they will thrive throughout their careers. Thank you. As I mentioned earlier, we have our largest class of all time, 17,000 students. A year ago, we were at 15,700 head count. One of the reasons for students coming to our university is that we represent social mobility for students in access and being resilient out in the job workforce. As many of you know, if you take the chance between now and getting to the microbrewery reception, you'll see we have 2 new academic buildings on campus, one being a new science and innovation building that opens fall of 2020. This is the first academic building that's been on this campus in 25 years. So that's an applause line also. We also have on the north part of campus, we have a new innovation and instruction building that is going to house our College of Business Administration and Public Policy. These are 2 new academic buildings. We're actually working on a proposal, and it looks very likely to have a 3rd academic building on campus. And finally, we've added a 500-bed plus learning living community and a dorm that's right across from the library. The next 3 years on this campus are going to set the stage for the next 25 years at Dominguez Hills, and we're glad to have you to be a part of it. We are full participants in the larger ecosystem that's necessary in our region to be successful. We welcome you today. We hope you'll continue to come back to Dominguez Hills, and as we say here, once a Toro, always a Toro. Thank you for having us, and we're happy to host this event.
Thank you very much, Provost Spagna. You sound great, by the way. Make me sound like Shirley Temple up here. Absolutely terrific. Ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to direct your attention now to the screen to view today's speaker schedule in an effort to support the innovative concepts of today's program and to lessen our carbon footprint. We've gone paperless. You can find today's schedule at the following URL. Remember when the internet first started on the radio, our announcer said, yeah, be sure to follow us, https://www. Well, you know the rest there, but there it is. And for those of you on social media, and who isn't, the hashtag today is CSUDH Forecast. Of course, it's not an event unless it's on social media, so remember in the olden days, I said, oh, put away your phones and whatever, but if anything, let's do the opposite. go ahead, take some pictures, and please tweet out or whatever, Insta this event so we can elevate the profile of this important occasion. Be sure to tag us on your social media post, hashtag CSUDH forecast. All right, let's get started now with our discussion. It's an honor now to introduce the Economist panel and invite them to the stage. Please welcome, all the way from Westwood, Dr. William Yu, UCLA Anderson Forecast, Dr. Jennifer Brodmann, CSUDH Economics Institute, Dr. Jose Martinez, Cal State Dominguez Hills Economics Institute, and Dr. Fynnwin Prager, Cal State University Dominguez Hills Economics Institute. I'm going to do it a little bit differently this year. Yeah. We have the clickers. The all-important clickers are being disseminated, and there's one up here as well. Ladies and gentlemen, we're going to have the speakers introduce themselves, say a little bit about who they are and what they do, and kick things off. Let's start with Dr. William Yu from UCLA.
Thank you. Hello, everyone. I'm very honored to be here again. So I'm an economist at UCLA Anderson Forecast, Anderson School of Management. So my job is doing economic forecast for US, California, and Los Angeles. At the same time, I also do research about US-China relationship. So I also teach data science and economic forecast at UCLA. So yeah, I'm glad to be here. Thank you.
Wonderful. Dr. Yu, thank you. Dr. Jennifer Brodmann.
Hi, I'm Dr. Jennifer Brodmann. I'm an assistant professor of finance at Cal State Dominguez Hills in the College of Business and Public Policy. I teach undergraduate courses in entrepreneurial finance and corporate finance. My research, I'm conducting a study right now looking at access to capital for African-American women entrepreneurs. I'm also working on building a mentorship program with the CSUDH Finance Student Society for building underrepresentation of women in finance as well.
Welcome.
Oh,
and Dr. Jose Martinez.
Sorry, I'm having technical issues here.
So
I'll just pass it on to you. There we go. Sorry.
there we go. It's not working. Oh well. My name is Finn Prager. It's a real pleasure to be here. Along with Dr. Jose Martinez, I co-direct the South Bay Economics Institute. I also do research in the area of disasters and policy and economics, and so I basically crunch the numbers on how much all these terrible things that happen to us, like fires and terrorist acts and things like this, cost our economy. But I've been really fortunate to have worked with Jose and with lots of regional partners, such as the South Bay Workforce Investment Board, who have presence here today, the South Bay Cities Council of Governments, and even a relatively recent partner, Goodwill, Southern California, South Los Angeles County, All these partners give us the fodder that we need to really study the economics of the region, and it's really a privilege and an honor to be able to connect those fantastic organizations with the work that we do with our students, who we've got many of them here today, so please reach out to them. And just a quick pitch, we're looking for advisory board members for our institute, so if you have any interest in that, then please come and let us know.
Thank you, Dr. Fynnwin Prager. And now, Dr. Jose Martinez.
Thank you very much. As Dr. Prager said, I also co-direct the Economic Institute here at Dominguez Hills. We've been very fortunate to receive a lot of support from our dean of the college, but also from the provost, the president, everybody basically in administration. We're very fortunate because that allows us to work on our research and involve all the faculty. Dr. Brodmann here is a good example of that. Dr. Nestor Garza doing work on urban economics, and Dr. Shireen El Hag also working with students. And we have wonderful students that work as research assistant fellows for the Institute, and they've basically been working with us for a couple of years already, and we're very fortunate to have them. I also represent the Department of Accounting, Finance, Economics, and Law. That's a big title, but and also I'm teaching financial forecasting. My students are somewhere in there, so you should be doing homework right now. But thank you for the invitation.
Wonderful. Dr. Martinez and Dr. Prager have both appeared on my program, and I know you guys know this area very, very well, so let me start with you, since you know the South Bay better than anybody else here. Give us an update on the South Bay economy, the current trends you're seeing, and tell us what's happening here.
Do you want to start with the housing?
Yeah, the housing, the key will be that in the South Bay cities, we see moderation in both prices and sales. We saw a big decline in sales in the first months of the year, but due to the decrease in the mortgage rates, I think sales pick up a little bit. So we saw a little bit of an increase in prices. Our forecast for the whole area is a very small increase in sales, but a very small increase also in prices for all areas in the South Bay, for all cities.
Any signs of leveling off? Just today on the latest S&P Case-Shiller CoreLogic Home Price Index, it indicated that prices actually slipped a bit month to month in the Los Angeles area, down by just 0.1%, but nevertheless down, and latest readings had prices in this Los Angeles region up just 1% over the past year. What do you see ahead for prices?
Labeling, like I said, this is a new thing for most areas in the South Bay. A decrease in prices is something that we haven't seen in a while, but we see that hopefully it become the new normal. Moderate prices and moderate sales. We don't want to go back to year-to-year increases of 5%, 6%, or 10% in home prices. That affects affordability for the whole area. So in a sense, happy to see those small declines in prices.
And there's winners and losers to all these changes, right? So the market changes and that produces winners. If you're a homeowner, you're feeling good when the prices go up. If you're a renter, you're feeling a bit frustrated. And actually, policy tends to kick in a bit later. So there's the statewide cap of 5% on rental increases. What's interesting about that is that almost reflects 2015 conditions, in that that's when prices were going up 5 or more %. And if you look in the LA region, that was the majority of zip codes were experiencing those kind of changes. Today, 2019 and last year, far fewer. So policy often takes a while to catch up to these phenomenon, and it's unlikely that a policy like that would actually have an impact on today's market, because very few rises are going to be up to 5%.
Yes, sir.
So I would like to add one point. So the other day I was looking at the data about city of home price in Los Angeles County, and I noticed a very interesting relationship. So I noticed that for those city like Manhattan Beach, this area, when you had a high home price, you see your home price decline over the past year. But if you look at other, like inland Los Angeles, you had a lower home price, but your home price actually increased over the past year. So I think that is just follow what you say. I think it's a very reasonable natural trend. So because over the past several years, we had this housing price appreciation for a long time. So for a lot of area, actually home price is out of reach for majority of Angelenos. So you see this kind of demand go down. But we still had a job increase. We still had a demand for house. So they go to those kind of cheaper area to buy the house, so drive out the home price. So it's a very interesting negative correlation. And actually this kind of negative correlation is also applied for the whole nation as well.
And certainly when somebody here asks you what's up, the correct answer is nothing but the rent. And let's talk about that for a moment. The rise of Silicon Beach, Professor Brodmann certainly has fueled a lot of this, right, with all the tech companies here and people getting good jobs here and rents going up. Give us an update, if you have it, on the rent situation here in this area.
The rental increases have gone up, but as in, like, say, startup activity in the area, it's heavy in aerospace and pharmaceuticals, tech. When you're looking at software services, mobile services as well, and also food and beverage. So those are like the heavy concentration of startup activity going on in the South Bay, and that's mostly concentrated in Hawthorne, Torrance, Inglewood, and El Segundo.
Any break on the rents here? Dr. Martinez, we're counting on you.
Well, I don't think they're going to see a big break. Even in houses, housing prices moderate in the area. People tend to go to the rental market many times because they cannot afford buying a home in the area. So they either rent in the area or they have to move to other areas like Riverside County or San Bernardino County. And that's where housing are a little bit more affordable. So
Oh my God, Riverside. Anybody live in Riverside County? You, sir. My God. The man. Wow. So is that what it takes? I mean, it's unbelievable. The commutes, the fact is a lot of people who work in this area don't live in the area. So tell us about that.
Well, we come in and we see everything is beautiful and looks green. But the reality is that when we move into this area, and this is becoming more personal, but when we move into this area, we look for a housing, and there's a lot of people talk about lack of housing, but it's also, there's a lack of beautiful housing. There's a lot of ugly housing in the area.
Old, worn out places. Right, go ahead.
But that's related to the policies that we've been discussing, the rental controls and all those issues, propositions that are limited the incentive for people to build or to renovate their homes. And the people are afraid to sell because they're going to be hit with property taxes. So all of that affects the markets. And unfortunately, for some like me, we had to look somewhere else for an area. By the way, Corona is a beautiful place.
You drive by there every day?
If you ever been in that area, call me. I'll let you know a few good restaurants.
Wow. Just today, the National Association, actually, I think it was the California Association of Realtors put out a statement saying that they're pushing California lawmakers to promote more building and finally do something to address the affordability issue. There are a couple of bills that were supported. I don't have those in front of me, nor do I want to put the audience to sleep here at the moment. But what do you think should be done from the top down to promote more building and address the affordable housing situation here?
Do you want to take this, William?
No, actually, I would like to add one thing. We have been talking about is rent affordability. Actually, there are two kinds of housing affordability. One is a homeowner. Okay, so we had this calculation based on your median mortgage payment over your median home price, household income. And then we look at the rental. So we had a median rental payment over median household income. So the other day I looked at this data across the nation. So it's very interesting. A lot of people overlook this. Actually, if we compare to the data in 2006 and 2019, actually in terms of housing affordability, for the homeowner, the ratio declined. So it means it's more affordable compared to the housing bubble peak in 2006. And the reason is because right now the mortgage rate is lower than 2006. However, for rental, that's totally different situation. We see the across the board increase in terms of this kind of a payment for your median household income. And unfortunately, number one metro is Los Angeles in terms of least affordable for renters. So it's about like 45% of your household income devoted to your rent. So it's very a dire situation.
So unfortunately, the percentage of your income that goes to your mortgage has gone down, mainly because mortgage rates have gone down, like you mentioned. But for renters, the money that they have to put in for down payment of a house actually has been up. So there's not much relief there for renters.
Right. Any hope from Sacramento, dare I say, to address the situation, other than the caps that they've just placed on rents, for example?
I think the state would love for different individual cities to allow more building in their cities. The problem is that we all live in places, and we're all responsible here in some respects, that don't want new buildings to come in, right? We're all quite happy with things as they are. And I'm not blaming everybody, but that's the reality. That if we're not prepared to allow that building in our backyard, not that we're all NIMBYs, but these things take time. Many cities have very stringent regulation, stringent policies that require lots of planning procedures. Now there are some bright points that you're seeing a lot of infill development. So changing from, strip malls into multi-use parking underneath, residents on top, commercial on the ground floor. But that's not quite enough to keep up with the market. And I suspect that the recent kind of flattening of the market, if you will, is partly due to those national trends, but also that we're seeing some of those more major developments coming in different cities.
People just also throwing in the towel because they just can't afford to do it anymore, right?
Right. And that's actually another thing that we've looked at is the number of people moving out of California who just can't afford it anymore.
Yeah.
So, Jose, do you want to speak a little bit about that?
Yeah, we look at if you look at the specific cities in the South Bay, the picture is a little bit blurry. But if you zoom out a little bit and look at the South Bay and Southern California and California as a whole, we have a net out migration. Basically, there are more people moving out than moving in. In the Southern California area, the only county that is receiving more migrants than sending out is Riverside and San Bernardino. All the other counties, Ventura, Los Angeles, Orange, and San Diego, there are more people moving out than moving in. Now, if you look at the characteristics, are very interesting because the people moving out are moving from California, they're moving to states like, no surprise, Texas, Nevada, Arizona, Colorado, and they're moving from mostly states in the Northeast, like New York, New Jersey, even Illinois. But then the characteristics are also very different. Like the people moving out tend to be younger, less educated, lower income, because maybe they cannot afford it. But the people moving in tend to be a little bit older, a little bit more educated, and higher income. To some people, that might seem like a good picture, but if you, I saw an article by the LAEDC, a recent article, that says that the projections are that most of the jobs created in this area are going to require a minimum level of education, and the wages are going to be moderate. So where are they going to come from? Maybe Corona. They have to.
Riverside?
So they have. The problem with housing affordability and traffic congestion might even get worse if you think that's going to be happening in the near future.
Is anybody here from Corona?
My cousin is.
Your cousin? Okay. Corona in the house.
Yes.
Now, Doctor, you, of course, you are involved with the Anderson forecast, and if you could zoom out for a moment on the big picture. Obviously, housing affordability, a very, very big issue, and just how inflation is calculated is something that's up for discussion nowadays, since officially it's very low, but people can barely afford the place that they live in, which is curious. But zoom out for a moment and give us an update on what you recently reported on the Anderson forecast as far as the outlook for the national and state economy.
Yes. So right now, economy is slowing down. So maybe later on we can talk about this concern everybody has. Are we gonna have a recession or not? But let's look at the data. I think 2 years ago we had this pass of the corporate income tax. I think that really helped the economy because over the past 2 years we had this on and off trade fight with China, and that really kind of hurt the confidence for the private sector in terms of a private investment. But because of this buffer, so I think we are getting by. So economy is slowing down. California economy is also slowing down, and the same as South Bay situation. So that's basically the situation right now.
Of course, we saw signals in the bond market earlier this year. Looks like things have turned around now. The inverted yield curve, and I don't want to get too technical and put people to sleep in here, but it looks like the Fed is doing that pivot and responding to what's been happening with interest rates. And as I mentioned earlier, it's widely expected they'll be lowering rates again tomorrow. So is that going to be the rocket fuel that we've seen in the past to pump up the economy?
Yes, I think so. Yeah, actually, I think Fed is doing the right thing by cutting the interest rate. So as you said, this will be third time. But actually, the other thing few people pay attention to, actually starting last week, the Fed decided to started to expanding their so-called balance sheet. So there was a huge reversal over the past 2 years. So over the past 2 years, the Fed was shrinking their balance sheet, just let their asset expire. And actually, I believe that kind of constrain the money in the market, especially for the housing market. So the number I got is $60 billion a year, a month. So that's a huge number. So in addition to the lower interest rate and this kind of expanding balance sheet, I think it will help the economy. So I'm very optimistic about this part, monetary policy. The other thing is, friend, you mentioned this inverted yield curve. So we economists believe this yield curve is one of the best predictor of upcoming recession. And we had this, over the past several weeks, we had this slightly inverted yield curve. If we look at a difference between 10 years and 3 months, or 10 years, 2 years, Treasury bonds, indeed, we had this very serious concern about this situation. However, this time, this might be a cliche. Some people say this time might be different. And the reason is because if you look at around the global financial market, Japan, Germany, and France, they all had a negative interest rate, government bonds interest rate for 10 years, so negative. So I believe there's a part of the reason we see this kind of low 10-year bond, which traditionally reflecting very weak demand, investment demand. But I believe right now is more of this kind of global investor seeking a little bit higher interest rate, because right now U.S. Treasury bond is like 1.7%, which is much higher than negative rate in Germany, Japan, and France. So they might cause some kind of a little bit false alarm of this inverted yield curve.
Before I turn to the panelists again, let me just turn to the audience for a moment. Given the choice of continuing the expansion, extending the record economic recovery we've seen, or recession, who thinks we're going to have continued expansion of the economy in the year ahead? Who thinks we're heading for a recession? Professor Martinez.
Yeah, my concern is what William was saying is that usually when we have a recession, the Federal Reserve lowers the federal funds rate and increases liquidity in the markets. The federal government usually responds to a recession by lowering taxes for people and increasing spending. But given the current situation, I don't think either the Federal Reserve or the federal government has much room to maneuver. So that's my only concern, that if we hit a severe recession, pretty much I feel like the economy has their hands tied. So that's my only concern.
It looks like the needle is finally moving, though, on housing, which has been a sluggish sector, right, with the interest rate moves and the way the bond market has behaved. So suddenly there is some light there, just at a time when prices are at pretty much all-time highs.
Yep. The key is consumer confidence. Consumer confidence. Consumers are 2/3 of the economy. So as long as people feel good about the economy, then things will continue to be right. But as you see the people to raise their hands, if they're thinking that there's going to be a recession, that may be curtailing their investment decisions. So we might have a recession just because people think that we're going to have a recession.
That's why I hate to even use the word, but I did use it, so. Dr. Prager.
Yeah, I think it's important to contrast between what Jose just mentioned of a severe recession, which occurred in 2008 because of a major issue in the financial market, and Dr. Brodmann can speak with more expertise about that. But I don't think we're seeing the same patterns emerging today. The housing market is much more robust. The mortgage industry is not under the same kind of pressures as it was at the time. We are seeing some personal credit loans being taken on that maybe are not sustainable, but maybe Dr. Brodmann can speak more to that.
Yes, I mean, we're not seeing the issues as much as like the subprime mortgage crisis as we had before. There might be some other issues, say, as like subprime auto loans, but that's going to be a little bit different than what we've seen with the housing crisis. There is still some means of concern, just as looking at the rising of corporate debt, as well as the correction of the job estimates from the Bureau of Labor Statistics, which also can be kind of a hint that there may be a mild recession sometime in future. One thing with the inverted yield curve is it is an indicator that there may be a recession, but it doesn't really tell you when. So it just kind of gives you a little bit of a signal, but not, when that would actually happen.
Of course, we were all around. I was on the air before, during, and after the Great Recession, and any canaries in the coal mine that you're picking up here based on the latest signals we've been getting? Obviously, consumer confidence seems to be very strong at the moment. Obviously, the job picture seems to be very strong. Interest rates very low. Housing seems to be on the rebound. But manufacturing is one weak area, for example, and this region is the biggest manufacturing region in the United States. So any canaries that you're finding, Dr. Brodmann?
Well, I mean, we do have the issues with the trade tension between U.S. and China. It does have an impact on the supply chains that we have based in the area. So until there is some type of agreement that's going to happen, I mean, there has been talk about it, but there's still going to be the December 15th tariffs that might be coming that will affect consumers, will also affect companies in the area as well.
And this just in, the U.S. and China are continuing to work on an interim trade agreement, but it might not be completed in time for the U.S. and Chinese leaders to sign it in Chile next month. According to administration officials today, President Trump and the Chinese president were expected to sign phase 1 of the agreement at next month's Asia-Pacific Economic Cooperation Summit in Chile. Reuters is reporting that this afternoon. Professor Yu, give us an update on what's happening on the U.S.-China trade front.
So based on the current information, I think it's better than what we thought because since the fall down of negotiation in May, all hell break loose. But seems like after several months, we kind of got back to this kind of a table. So right now, I'm a little bit more optimistic than pessimistic. But we are negotiating with China. Everything could happen. So we should be very cautious. So I would like to go back to what we talk about is manufacturing and industrial production, because right now, in terms of year-over-year growth rate, indeed, we are in the negative territory. That's why Wall Street and a lot of people are very concerned about upcoming recession. But I want to inform everybody, actually, we had a much worse year-over-year negative growth rate in terms of industrial production and manufacturing in 2015. Yeah, if you remember that. But we didn't have a recession at that time, so maybe this time we will get by. So I would just say, my colleagues talk about this. I believe, even like if there's a recession coming in 1 year or two, this recession might be milder than we thought. Okay, because I believe 2008, everybody remember, is a very serious recession because we had a serious overinvestment in housing market, in all kinds of investment. But this time we didn't see that. So maybe there's some kind of adjustment, but it will be milder than we thought.
And what we can also see with the loan practices is that there's a lot more transparency when it comes to purchasing a home, the kind of interest that you're paying. Same thing with auto loans as well. And you've even seen this demand where it's shifted from people wanting to, they prioritize affordability over location. So there isn't that overextension that there was during the housing crisis.
So is there any bubble talk here now? Talk of the bubble bursting or anything dramatic like what we saw 10 plus years ago now?
I don't think so. I think that if anything, I think the housing market is helping the economy right now. Instead of what happened before, that it was causing the crisis. So I think things look good. I'm always hoping for a soft landing if there's any correction. What I mentioned about the severe recession, I don't think it's coming, but what I mentioned was to say that the Federal Reserve and the federal government have already done things to prevent that. So I don't think we're going to see a severe recession, at least not caused by housing.
That's encouraging. Very, very encouraging. Now, Dr. Brodmann, you're focused on the entrepreneurial scene here. Let's talk about some of the exciting things happening here in the South Bay now with the rise of Silicon Beach, of course, and all the great companies setting up shop here. And just tell us about some of the exciting things you've seen lately and what do you see ahead?
There's definitely more investment in having tax incentives, having hiring assistance programs, also for having women and minority business owners having access to city contracts in different areas in the South Bay. There's accelerators and incubators. We have an incubator on campus that helps entrepreneurs both in the community and students, and actually students can go for free and have access to mentorship. We recently just had an Access to Capital conference where we talked about access to capital for entrepreneurs in the area, as well as having a pitch competition. We have also had events on campus. An example is the Innovative Woman, where we've had pitch competitions of women entrepreneurs. So there's more of the outreach of having more investment in a diverse array of types of entrepreneurs in the region.
There was a big competition for most fundable companies. I believe a company in Torrance was one of the top companies here. So a lot of startups and VC activity, right? So anything else you could tell us what's the hottest thing here right now?
Well, there's a lot of activity in the aerospace, especially in El Segundo. We will have someone we'll have Van speak from Starburst Accelerator talking about that. He's right over there, so you'll be hearing from him soon. There's definitely more outreach as well to small businesses. You can see more access for small business owners through like the small business development centers. There's one based on a community college campus. An example is El Camino College. And so just having more events, having more outreach to kind of build that entrepreneurial activity in the areas is what's going on.
Yes, go right ahead.
So I just want to add some number to support what you said.
Sure.
Based on the latest data, which is 2017 to 2018 third quarter from QCEW. So basically, South Bay economy in terms of job number is growing similar to Los Angeles, which is about like a 2%, 1.6% over the past 2 years. However, there are three hotspots, I would say, in South Bay. Number one is El Segundo. So basically, 2017-18, it increased 2,800 jobs. And the number two is Torrance, okay, increased 4,500 jobs. And number three is Hawthorne, increased by 1,700 jobs. So these are powerhouse of South Bay economy. So I heard the mayor of El Segundo is here, right? You should be very proud of yourself.
Any other thoughts on the Silicon Beach aspect, the tech sector here, Dr. Prager or Dr. Martinez?
On the whole, it's been a massive benefit to the local community, and hopefully that the Phoenix wing of benefit will keep flowing down to cover the whole of the South Bay region. Clearly, El Segundo and Torrance have been the kind of, and Hawthorne have been the most active areas in that sense. But there's no reason why it can't continue. We've got a really innovative culture here. Even on this campus, we were given a full 10-year accreditation by our accreditation body, and they labeled this campus as having an entrepreneurial spirit. And I think that reflects the community here. We're seeing it in all the resources that Jennifer was talking about. We actually for our institute, we held a conference where we gathered together local government and local entrepreneurs. And one of the entrepreneurs said something that really stuck out, which was government resources are like a fire hydrant gushing. You know, there's just lots of resources available to local businesses. And the question is, how do we connect the businesses to those resources? And as long as that culture is maintained, I think we're going to see a bright future.
You can bring a horse to the fire hydrant, but can you get him to drink is the question. I'm going to turn the questions over to you and the audience in just a moment, but certainly another point that I think we should explore a little bit more is the capital situation, especially as it relates to Chinese capital, which appears to be drying up in the entire region and indeed nationwide. Any insights as to what's happening here? If you go to the Staples Center, you see 3 towers across the street at a half-completed construction site. There's virtually no construction activity there whatsoever in a $1 billion project. It looks like funding has dried up and the construction work there has dried up, and apparently the same situation has occurred in San Francisco, one of the big projects there, which was Chinese funded. Dr. Yu, can you give us an update on what's happening with Chinese money coming in or not coming into the area?
Yep. If we really want to try to focus on risk, what is the biggest risk coming in the next few years? I would say it's coming from China. So Chinese economy is really in a big trouble. They had a huge housing bubble. They had a huge debt, over leverage. They had this structural reform which cannot work it out. So it's a huge problem. And right now they are fighting this trade war with United States. I think it's also very unwise. So if there's any risk, I think it will be coming from China. So watch out, China. So right now, let's talk about these capital things. I think it started like 2 or 3 years ago. So Chinese government had this control of the capital flow in and out of, I think, out of China. And I think it's very reasonable because we have seen this Chinese currency depreciate over the past, I think 3 years ago. So in order to stop this kind of depreciation, they have to constrain this capital flow. So I think that's the main reason. So right now, I don't know what will happen because right now in the book, China has 3 trillion US dollars, but some people are saying that actually there's much less than that. So that's very scary. So I would say don't hope for capital coming from China again. So maybe one day we will see the buyer, for example, Korean buyer, Japanese buyer, they will buy this property from China. I think that would be better. There will be a natural solution for that.
Is Chinese money in this area significant, and what's going on significant for this area?
I think it is. It's worth just to provide a little balance to that. A lot of these investments have been in capital stock and in major, developments. But when you look at actually foreign direct investment in terms of companies, China isn't that highly ranked. It's just something that we looked into a few years back, where the number 1 investor in terms of foreign-owned companies is actually Japan. Yeah. And second, I think, is the UK, because these company relations tend to be developed over longer periods. So Chinese money is coming in more recently, and over time, if that had continued, if there weren't the capital constraints, you'd imagine there'd be this flow towards further investment in companies. But actually, what we're seeing is in this region, one of the real strengths of our region is that we've got representation from nations all around the world, right? Yeah. It's one of the true advantages, both the Pacific Rim and connections with Europe. And so that really gives us a strength in that it doesn't need to just be Chinese finance.
Certainly, and at the reception earlier, we have people from all over the world here today, and some of you have come from as far away as Riverside, so it's absolutely amazing. So we're going to turn it over to the audience now, and we have people from various industries here, and I know the first question is sometimes slow in coming, so is there a second question from the audience? And indeed there is. We need a microphone for this gentleman here, table number 4. Stand by for the mic, and we'll have it over to you in just a second.
Do you see any deflationary risk in the next 10 to 20 years?
Deflationary?
Deflationary risk.
Do you see any deflationary risk in the next 10 to 20 years?
In the United States.
In the United States.
Deflation, that's a concern in Europe, right? That's why they had this negative interest rate. So in that regard, I think Federal Reserve monetary policy is very important. We make a huge mistake in Great Depression in 1930 because we had this very constrained monetary policy. I think we learned a lesson. So that's why I talk about this $60 billion amounts increased balance sheet. I think that will help. But just go back a little bit, because when we, over the past several months, when we are talking about this tariff and trade tension between the United States and China, actually we are very concerned about the inflation because a lot of goods we are using are from China, made in China. And because of the tariff, so we are concerned about this higher cost of imported products. So I would say I'm not that concerned about deflation in the United States, but they might not be the case in other parts of the world.
All right, what about the question of negative interest rates in the United States? Once thought unthinkable, but now not quite so out of the question. Might that be on the horizon here? Are mortgage companies going to pay us to take out a mortgage, for example?
No, I don't
Anyone?
think it's very reasonable to expect that. But there's a limit. A downward limit to interest rates, and the way that I feel, we're getting pretty close to it. So I'll expect the interest rate the federal funds rate go down one more time. I don't think it's going to go down further than that, unless there's something severe happening. But I think we're going to see one more cut tomorrow, and that's going to be it for the rest of the year. That's my forecast.
Next question from the audience, please. Right back there, and the microphone is coming.
A question for Dr. Liu. With regard to intellectual property, what would be your forecast of a meaningful agreement and enforceable agreement, and what role would the World Trade Organization play in that?
Regarding China, probably, right?
Yeah, I see right now, everybody agree World Trade Organization need to be reformed. So we are gonna see some kind of reform, and it has to be. For example, just one example. Do you know that actually I just got this kind of idea recently? Singapore actually is assigned as a developing country in this kind of WTO, so they can apply this kind of very low tariff. So I think it's very unfair because Singapore, if you look at the GDP per capita, is it's even higher than the United States. So definitely they need to be reformed. And so go back to this U.S.-China trade negotiation. I think it's a very important event in this U.S.-China relationship over the past 3 decades. And it could be very good. So I really, truly hope that China can agree with the United States for this real structural reform. Actually, it will help China because Chinese economy got a lot of problems. So to enforce their IP protection, to stop this force technical transfer, to stop a government subsidy to their industry. I think they are all very positive things for China to follow. So hopefully, I hope that there will be a kind of a realization. But I'm not sure because the decision, the ball is in Beijing government, and we don't know what happened over there. You know, seems like there's a political tension between hawkish and dovish group in Beijing government. So we don't know what will happen. So I hope we will have a deal done, and that would be definitely good for China, definitely good for United States, and definitely good for the United States. And you mentioned this enforcement. That is very important. We need to have some kind of enforcement mechanism. I think White House is doing the right thing to make sure this trade agreement comes with enforcement. Otherwise, based on the past record, China might get away with it in the future. Yeah.
Anyone else from the audience? We have one more question from the audience. Let's take it right over here. Number 8. Table number 8 is the highest bidder. This is an auction the other night.
I wanted to ask you, what do you think of the budget deficit's impact on the economy, and what about the 2020 presidential election? What kind of impact that might have?
The federal deficit is around $21 trillion now, and since Professor Yu, you mentioned the White House, give us your view of what's the political drama in Washington and its potential impact on the economy.
Okay, so I would say don't even think about that in the budget deficit. Yeah, it's not gonna solve. Yeah, no, there's no. Yeah, there will be no political will to solve that in the short run. Yeah, so But actually, you know, if we look at the budget deficit over GDP, the ratio actually over the past year or two actually is relatively stable. So what we are hearing is just the number is increasing, but because GDP is increasing. So indeed, right now it's 4.5% of GDP. So indeed, it's kind of we need to figure out a way. But I don't think in the near future there will be political will to handle that. Yeah.
I can talk a little bit about the market volatility. Market volatility has been projected to be, pretty consistent volatility. That's funny. But anyway, throughout until the presidential election, we don't know what's going to happen. And there are issues with market volatility. Say if any firms want to go and do an IPO, there's issue in stock pricing for that because you don't know what the supply and demand is going to be and what price will work. So that that market volatility can go and have impacts on entrepreneurs as well, entrepreneurships as well.
Mm-hmm. For Professor Martinez and Professor Prager, any final thoughts on this and where people can get more details about your latest reports?
Go to our website. Yes. We've got a great website, South Bay Economics Institute searches, and we're really interested, as I mentioned, to get an advisory board going. So if you're interested, let us know. But also, if you want to have us research a particular issue that's of concern to you, then let's talk.
The website, HTTP, what is it again? Yeah. By the way, it is to be noted, today is the 90th anniversary of the stock market crash of October 29, 1929. So we've come a long way, so we want to feel good about it. We're near record highs today. So please thank our panel of economists, and thank you very much for your attention. We're going to transition immediately to our tech panel. Thank you very much. Thank you. We'll introduce now the very interesting tech speaker panel and talk innovation now. Innovation here in the South Bay. Please welcome to the stage Monica Jan from Virgin Orbit. Also with us, Phillip Weicker from Canoo. And Van Espahbodi from Starburst Accelerator. Unfortunately, Dr. Sender from NantKWest was not able to join us this afternoon. Thank you very much, folks, for joining us, and I'll do what I did with the previous panel. If you could kindly say hello, introduce yourself. Let's start with Van from Starburst Accelerator. Tell us a little bit about yourself and your company, please.
All right. Is this thing on? Yeah, okay. Thank you, everyone, for having me. Starburst Accelerator.
Starburst, I said it right.
So
they got great candies.
Yeah, it's very good, yeah.
Excellent.
We put them out wherever we have events. Sorry we didn't get them out tonight. I am 18 years in the aerospace and defense industry. I grew up in Southern California. I left to pursue a career in government. Barbara, I just noticed you. I worked on the Hill in DC before being recruited by the defense industry, where I spent many years overseas in questionable parts of the world, mostly focused on export control and tech transfer, what technologies the US government wants to see allowed into other countries to shape our foreign policy in the regions. It's a very specialized field. Eventually, the British government had privatized their equivalent of the FAA and the aerospace operations. And they brought me across where I looked to do a lot of efficiencies and corporate venturing in new technologies in that operation to then transfer back into the US operations with the Air Force, NASA, and the FAA. I ran away from entrepreneurship and the culture of Southern California, only to be introduced to my business partner who convinced me to start this adventure 5 years ago, where we believe entrepreneurs are the real change makers. And when we came here to Southern California, everyone steered us towards lovely El Segundo, who's been nothing short of great for us. And we are really proud to call this our home and headquarters. We're now in 8 countries and incubating and accelerating hundreds of startups that are being filtered from thousands that continue to pop up on a daily basis. I have some slides. I can go through them, but I'd like to let my fellow panelists introduce themselves first.
Are the slides of Starburst?
Do you want me to do it first?
Go for it.
Okay, all right. Do you have a clicker?
Yeah.
All right. So I thought I'd just kind of set the scene in terms of what we qualify as aerospace, and then I know Monica will touch a little bit more on some of the new space economy. When we talk about the economics of scale, most of us think of the Boeings and the Northrop Grummans and the Raytheons where I used to work. And we often think of the emerging companies that have been around for actually quite some time now. SpaceX is almost 18 years old. Planet has been around since 2010. And just to kind of understand the sheer scale and speed in which these businesses are becoming market competitive, I just thought I'd throw some statistics up there. So just how not just the tech sector, but aerospace in particular has really embraced this venture capital growth and valuation in which we're seeing companies that are employing hundreds of people. Another good example is Relativity Space in Inglewood that started 3 years ago. A graduate of USC has been building 3D printed rocket engines. Cold emailed Mark Cuban, 3D printed rocket engines, space is sexy, and he secured $350K in angel fundraising. And 3 years later, a month ago, he announced his $140 million C round that includes celebrities like Jared Leto, Mary Meeker from Kleiner Perkins, and many others, estimated to be worth about $700 to $800 million in a company valuation, based right here in Southern California. So when you think about the sheer scale and economics of how much money is being pumped into the sector, we've done our own analysis, but Southern California and LA in particular tends to stack up on par with the UK government or France and Germany combined. I believe, and we see a sort of a shift of what has traditionally been investing in media and now investing a lot more in enabling capabilities and automating. We talked about manufacturing as a hub in Southern California. So how do factory floors achieve these kinds of satellite production, aircraft production, and many other things. We're seeing a lot of the existing companies also reinvigorate their existing investments in the venture side at an earlier stage. There's nothing new about venturing. TRW Ventures 20 years ago made venture capital investments, but we're seeing that resurgence happen again. Boeing pivoted and evolved its economic investments into early stage companies with an initiative called Horizon X. Every month for the last 2 years, they've made an investment of millions going into early stage companies, and we're seeing that many more companies from Honeywell, Triumph, BAE, and many others also capitalizing on that. When you start to segment those types of investments, we're seeing everything from the future mobility, whether it's flying cars. We talked about China as an investor. We've seen Tencent put $100 million into a German electric flying vehicle. We're seeing much more in robotics, IoT and sensors, and again, many more capabilities that are enabling the future of manufacturing happening right here in your own home. We think of aerospace as a very generic term. It captures everything to do with mobility, communications, and intelligence that spans space, regional mobility, whether it's supersonic jets, or the urban environment, from enabling infrastructure that captures how things are communicating for what we call urban air mobility, which NASA's working on. And there are companies right here in Hawthorne that are about to announce Uber for helicopters out of Hawthorne to Orange County. So get ready for all that pretty soon at a reasonable cost.
We need it today.
Yeah. We started in 2012, and we're now identifying what I thought was 1,000 startups per year that are at that seed stage of funding. That's a normally strong intellectual property spinning out of labs, have yet to secure their first major commercial deal. But my team has recently informed me that that number has jumped up to 2,000 per year. So it's an incredible amount of companies and people that are looking to productize on the outside of what has traditionally been government-subsidized defense programs from non-traditional investors in this space. When we look at Southern California, this is the way we normally see the world. We've kind of cut it up from what you know as government, so whether it's SMC, whether it's JPL, or Edwards Air Force Base, to academic institutions, industry champions, and the fun part is the blue part. And for me, we actually cut that out and did a heat map just to show you at what stage of maturity these early stage companies continue to emerge. Now, I won't call Millennium Space Systems or SpaceX a startup anymore. SpaceX is estimated to be worth about $30 billion today. And Millennium Space Systems was recently acquired by Boeing. And I'm sure Monica has some interesting updates for you on what's happening at Virgin. But This is just to go and indicate a powerful indicator of that many more companies that are at that early stage that are securing the kind of capital to become market contenders. So this is just some successes we've seen over the last year, and we're seeing a lot more around the new space economy, electric aviation, unmanned traffic management, additive manufacturing, augmented reality for pilot training, and drone services. Slingshot is a spinoff that came out of SMC, the Air Force Base, that's doing geospatial analytics using AI for disaster relief and supporting a lot of the other operations in other markets. We're seeing people that don't normally take advantage of these capabilities, like hedge funds, short stock against Honda by using their own private services to see how many cars are pulled into the port of Long Beach. And they're able to detect and signal and see how much they want to kind of compete in the marketplace for that kind of intelligence. And that's pretty much it. We're global. We do a lot of events that kind of do what is commonly referred to as the aerospace Shark Tank. And we believe in collaboration is important for the industry, and we are sponsored and paid for by most of the industry primes and government agencies around the world to continue to curate and support these emerging entrepreneurs to become the new market contenders in what is changing the way we think of when it comes to aerospace.
Ben, thank you very much for that great introduction to Starburst Accelerator. Very impressive. Who wants to go next? Monica? Okay, Phillip?
Sure.
Go for it.
I think there's a video.
Phillip Weicker from Canoo, ladies and gentlemen. Let's give him a warm welcome once again.
There's a video to watch here made by a bunch of my colleagues. So let's just watch that. As the video says, we're Canoo. We're based in Torrance. We've been around for just under 2 years. We're focused on innovative electric vehicles, which will be available through a innovative business model and by subscription only. And I'm sure we'll talk more about that for today.
Phillip, tell us a bit more about yourself and how you ended up here in this area.
I've been working in automotive electrification since 2001, focused on energy storage, energy conversion. I came to California about 10 years ago, and I'm part of the co-founding team at Canoo.
Welcome, and thank you very much for that video and for the presentation here today. And we saw Sir Richard Branson at the floor of the New York Stock Exchange this week, and joining us here now, Monica Jan from Virgin Orbit. Welcome, Monica.
Thank you.
Tell us about yourself and Virgin Orbit.
So, hi, very happy to be here today. Thank you, Ben. My name is Monica. I'm the Senior Director of Strategy and Customer Experience at Virgin Orbit. This all started very, very far back. Thank you, Marilyn, for putting this slide in at the very last minute. So yesterday was a very historical day for Virgin Galactic. And I'm so happy, and it hit me so hard when I saw this picture that Virgin Galactic chose to represent the day that being the first space travel company listed on the New York Stock Exchange. It's such a long way coming. Thank you. So this is meaningful to me because there's this little girl staring at the New York Stock Exchange building. And for me, it started when I was 10 years old as a little girl in Taiwan and watching the first Taiwanese astronaut go to space on space shuttle. At that time, there's no way to work on space for a little kid from not United States, not Russia, not Europe. And that led to 8 years later, when I was 18 years old, I ended up as an engineering student in USC. So I'm a local grown engineering workforce. Many of you here are looking to develop. So this is the product that came out of this pipeline. So when I was in USC, following my space dream, love robots, love space, I ended up in TRW at the time, building commercial space satellites. Shortly after that, I went into the commercial industry and building semiconductor Broadcom. When the whole stock market crashed, a lot of the semiconductor company project were also kind of slowing down. At the time, I was thinking at what I really wanted to do, and to me, the passion is still in space. So I got in touch with my old colleagues and went back to then became Northrop Grumman. So I was in Northrop Grumman building space programs, and went from engineering into the dark side, into business, and got my MBA. So here I am, you know, away from engineering, still loving it, and just secretly geeking out over my colleagues' projects. But the fun side is now I get to travel a bit, doing strategy and working with our international partners in corporate strategy, really looking at strategic roadmaps. While this whole new space race is going on, there's other things happening. So we all saw, if you remember 2004, 15 years ago, was actually October this month. That's when Scale Composite won the $10 million X Prize. No one really truly understood what that could become. We had high hopes, but we never knew what this could become today. And today, there's so many people building rocket companies, and there's a lot of space technologies booming, where Van, it's so nicely shown in your presentation. What I want to show you is, born out of all this space race for people to go, there's a whole other industry trends happening, and that gave birth to Virgin Orbit. So I'll show you a little video.
Our planet is changing, and so are the ways we explore it, connect it, inspire it, and protect it. The satellites we build to serve humanity from space are growing smaller and less expensive. And that's made the list of satellite builders larger and more diverse. New investment has flooded into the satellite world, and new talent, new inspiration, and new applications as well. But the greatest satellites in the world can't help anyone when they're stuck here on planet Earth. Lacking an affordable, flexible, and responsive ride to space, many small satellites would never get off the ground. But that's all about to change. For 4 years now, Virgin Orbit has been designing, building, and testing a totally new way of launching satellites. A launch service that is best matched to these new, smaller, and more affordable satellites. Virgin Orbit has built a system that can launch on short notice, flying from wherever needed to reach whatever orbit the mission requires. It's a system built on one of the most powerful, proven aircraft of all time, which serves as a flying launch pad, helping deliver precious cargo exactly where it needs to go, exactly when it needs to get there. It's a system that marries tried and true rocket technology with state-of-the-art manufacturing capabilities. All put together by a team with a bold vision, just the right industry experience, and a little bit of a maverick spirit. The small satellites carried by Launcher One will help us better understand and care for our planet and our part of the solar system, connecting us with others across the globe, growing economies, and keeping us safe. Dozens of satellites have already booked their flights on Launcher One, and with an exhaustive testing program nearly complete, Virgin Orbit is poised to launch the small satellite revolution.
So while all the space race is going on for sending humans to space, small satellites have starting to really take notice and starting to take and fly. You no longer have to build a really large satellite the size of half of this room for $30 billion over 25 years. When I was in Northrop, I noticed the change, and I couldn't help but trying to figure out how to really continue to push and help and participate in this new space economy. So I left Northrop and actually started Accelerator program for space startups. It's where I met Van, I think in the early days. Yeah. We all had to go around and be a space evangelist. Nobody saw, most people, the investors, didn't realize and still don't that there's such a paradigm shift in the space industry. We're starting to see, as you can see from the graph, a lot more venture investors getting into the game for the last 10 years or so. That's just mostly in the United States. In the last 2 to 3 years, I've noticed there's a lot more investors globally looking into getting to the space race game. Not only the Americans are excited, children around the world and entrepreneurs around the world are getting pretty excited about this as well. For us, we realized that the need for launch service for space transport has changed. That you no longer need to only launch a gigantic satellite 3 times a year. Now we're looking at the economy where the demand is thousands of satellites needed to be launched monthly and flexibly. So for that, we created an air launch platform. We think it's pretty cool. You know, we can launch rocket and launch from a 747 Boeing jet. It's pretty cool and pretty flexible solution. So we are based in Long Beach, and we have about 550 employees so far. We just did the drop test for our first rocket, and we're actually on target to do the first test launch by end of this year. So this is a kind of a shot over the factory where we have currently 5 rockets in production. Having an airplane as a launch platform also lends itself to a completely different set of ground support equipment innovation. You probably all seen rocket launches. That's vertical, has a gigantic structure, costs a lot to build, costs a lot to maintain. There's nothing else you can do with it if you don't do launch with it. But because it's the air launch platform, it needs to be mobile. It can go launch from any location that can accommodate a 747 takeoff at 10,000 feet runway. So therefore, we designed the ground support equipment structure completely mobile to go along with it. They look very much like the trailer that you will see at an airport. So because of that, the vision is actually very grand. To us, we want to bring launch services to the world, not just located within the country that it's developed in, but really be able to partner with international partners and countries that don't have the funding to develop a rocket on their own, that do not want to invest in that, but want to quickly build up a space capability in their region. So for that reason, we have a lot of customers and international partners and space agencies approaching us, discussing partnership. So for now, our baseline is in California, our home base, our headquarters is in Long Beach, and we're launching from Mojave. We can also launch from Florida or Guam, 3 different US locations. That gives us access to all the orbits that people want to dream up and create business and send their satellites to. Recently, we also announced partnership with UK, Italy, and Japan. So we're really excited to help bring in not only launch capability, but partner with them to build up local space innovation. So what I want to say at the end is, it's really not just about a rocket. Rockets are really cool, and I meet people all around going, oh my God, your company's so cool. But the way we see it in Virgin Orbit that really powers a lot of us working so hard to get these launch off the ground is that we see us as an enabler. This is really the last link that right now the demand just exceeds supply that can really launch all the cool projects that Van and his companies are working on. So we can actually get them to space to create IoT, give you more internet in the sky in your airlines, or monitor natural disasters. Just a lot of creative applications are now coming out to connect the world and monitor the world. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you. Well, I'm elated to be here. I think the first book I ever bought was the How and Why Wonder Book of the Moon for 25 cents, I think it was, and of course watched all the Apollo launches back in the day, and had the tremendous privilege of doing all of the space shuttle launches for the CBS radio network from 1985 through 91. So very attached to the space program and very excited about what's happening here. And certainly when you talk about entrepreneurs, Sir Richard Branson is one of the brightest stars in the world. Monica, tell us about how it is working for him and the kind of enthusiasm he brings for this company and for this project here.
Wow, where do I start? First of all, part of the reason why I'm at Virgin was really because of him. I've always been a huge Richard Branson fan, read his books, and just love him as a guy that's really down to earth and charitable. But you know, when you first time you're meeting your hero, it's a little bit nerve-wracking because you don't know if he's really the guy you imagine him to be. And I have to say, I'm really happily not surprised. He's really down to earth and really kind and genuine. I think the biggest thing about him is he's very empowering. It's a very, in virtual orbit, it's a very open door policy, very flat hierarchical kind of place. You can always walk in the CEO's door and talk to him. Richard comes and visits quite frequently now because we're getting closer to, he's very excited about all the space companies for one, two, we're getting so close to launch, both Galactic and us. So he comes and meets everybody, and it's just quite incredible. He's very on time. Comes and makes sure that he not only meets with all the executives, he goes around the factory and shake hands with everybody and taking pictures and asking how their day is and asking if they have any great ideas. So when he hosts dinner, he will actually take some of, not just the executive, but invite a diverse group of employees out to dinner that night and just to hear them out. So it's a really great place.
So you have operations in Long Beach as well as in Palmdale, right? To the
Mojave, yeah.
Mojave Desert.
Yes.
Well, thank you for sharing that. That's terrific. Van, who's your hero in the entrepreneurial world?
The other day, we mentor these students through the Matthew Sakowitz Foundation at the Aerospace Corporation, and the students competed on doing a debate on Elon versus Jeff Bezos. Sorry, Monica. And I like to challenge the students, but this is an unfair situation. I mean, the reality is, whether you're a fan of either, you don't have to be a tech tycoon or a tech billionaire to become a player in the industry anymore. So the barriers to entry have never been as low as they are today. And I would always encourage your students that are studying this, or your children, or yourselves that you're in the industry and you think you can do this, then there's never been more opportunities for you guys to compete. But I am a big fan of Jeff Bezos.
Okay. Phillip, let me ask you the same question while we're on the subject. As far as your entrepreneurial hero, who is it?
Yeah, certainly myself and a number of the co-founding team at Canoo have been part of Elon's orbit, so to speak, in one way or another. But I think, to echo Van's point, really the heroes are the people who choose to be part of these companies, the people who issue the large organizations and the safety and the familiarity that they bring and decide that they want to be part of something new and have an impact on something that could be more uncertain. I think those are the people that really, on the toughest days that I have, those are the people who are inspiring to me, or the people who've chosen to be part of these projects.
And it's wonderful that we're able to discuss these things coming up in the future, and some of them couldn't happen fast enough. So Van, when are we going to get the first flying cars here in Southern California?
They exist.
Are they in the air today?
There are aircraft being flown over the 405 today to be tested, that are testing their autonomy systems. Unfortunately, you can't fly in them just yet. But just like, oh gosh, what's the Google self-driving car company?
Waymo.
Waymo. Just like Waymo is driving cars around Mountain View with kind of monitoring capabilities, the same thing is happening with helicopters right now over your heads without you realizing it. So
are they stealth?
They have some pretty awesome graphics on the side. There's a lot of different companies trying to do it, but right now, if you flew into New York, you want to be piloted. I mean, this is a fun audience question. Let me get a show of hands if you would get in a self-flying electric vertical takeoff and landing system helicopter today without a pilot. How many of you would put your children in there?
One very enthusiastic person. How old is the child?
I will say that if we asked the same question 100 years ago about an elevator,
yeah,
we would probably get the same response. An elevator was a complicated and scary mechanical device. It needed to be operated by a professional. Yeah. And now if you want to get in an elevator, How many of you would put your children in an elevator?
Exactly.
Probably a
That's
lot
very
more.
good. Yeah.
So Phillip, your vehicles, when are they hitting the road here?
Our plan is to start production in 2021 and to launch shortly thereafter. We've, no surprise, chose Los Angeles as our launch market, and that we'll build out from there.
Self-driving?
We will offer a driver assistance system. We'll be focusing on making that a meaningful and something that makes our driving life a lot easier. Very similar to the most advanced systems that are available today. Yeah.
How will it work?
It'll be very intuitive and easy to select autonomous driving mode, where we'll be able to offer that lane centering, maintaining distance from the vehicle in front of you. We're focusing on monitoring the driver to determine the driver intent, which we think provides the best way to communicate with the driver and deliver messages to the driver that she or he may not be paying attention. So we want to focus on those features.
Will you have the vehicles scattered around like the scooters are scattered around, where people can just jump in, or on the sidewalk? God forbid. How are they going to be deployed?
Our initial model will be a subscription to a single vehicle, a single VIN model, and we'll look at more interesting ownership and deployment models from there.
Are we going to get flying scooters? That'd be cool, right?
There are things called
Yes?
flikes, flying bikes.
Say that again?
There is the concept of a flike exists, a flying bike.
Flying bike.
Motorcycle.
Flike.
Yeah, flike. Yeah.
Never. Who heard that term before here? Flike.
The founder of Google, Larry Page, actually invested in a company called Kitty Hawk, and you're welcome to Google them right now, and you'll see that they're doing test flights up in the Bay Area. Yeah.
F-L-I-K-E.
That's just the concept. There's
That's
other
cute.
companies that call themselves Flake. Yeah, but yeah. There's jetpacks. That's all that old Rocket Man stuff is coming back, and it's existing today. There's companies out of New Zealand, here in the U.S. that are doing rocket pack capabilities. The French Ministry of Defense in the UK is also, for their kind of border patrolling on coasts, are flying these jetpacks, kind of like what do you call them? Those motorized scooters people are using in offices and stuff. I forgot what they call them. Yeah. Hoverboards.
Hoverboards.
Yeah.
What?
Hoverboards.
Hoverboards. Okay, we want to get the terms right here. So yeah, okay, hoverboards. Very, very exciting. Now, is any of that activity happening here? And what's some of the cutting edge stuff happening in our backyard here?
Yeah, so I kind of deflected your last question. Southern California is definitely considered one of the most exciting places to adopt these principles. And I think the County of Los Angeles and the DOT and the economic development agencies are not ignoring that, and those conversations are happening. There's still a big gap between the conversation at a national level and the local level, and where accountability lies on things we just haven't even thought about. What happens if a young woman gets in a flying vehicle with a scary looking person that might intimidate them at night? I don't know. Like, there's all these weird safety features that sociologically we have yet to start to think about, and I think there's no clear accountability of who takes on the role of allowing these piloted projects to actually happen. The FAA has given experimental licenses to different types of new aircraft that are being tested all around us. And I imagine Uber is pushing hardest in trying to allow for certification of certain aircraft to be flown in that sense. I would say, my best guess, I'd like to say before the 2024, 2025, it'll be much more common in our lives, the same way we think about autopilot in a Tesla today. And hopefully by 2028, especially, the Olympics are being considered as a target time frame to make it that much more common for people to think about autonomy and mobility, not just on the ground, but in the air. And technically, it's easier to prove this case in the air than it is on the ground, because you have less obstacles. And there's a lot of other use cases that have been proven. So I'd love to hear Phillip's perspective on that as well.
Yep. Yeah. Before we let you go, what's the vision of the future then? Will there be lanes for flying cars too, or what?
Well, corridors in the sky have long existed. I think we all like to look at boundaries in different ways, political boundaries, but the airspace and highways in the sky have long been a common theme. It's just becoming normalized to the common consumer. I think the safety that goes into the skies and what happens when you travel, and why up until a year ago our skies were fatality-free for 8 years, is because of the rigor and culture that goes into how our airspace is managed. And I think highways in the sky and corridors in freeways, or the way you want to think about it, have always been that way. And we're starting to see that start to become much more democratized to the common consumer in terms of what airspace belongs to them. Where are those highways in the sky, and will their noise pollution be affecting their home and where they live?
Phillip, any thoughts about how they work in the sky?
I would echo Van's point that in some ways the most difficult challenge for autonomous vehicles and autonomous systems in general is perception and understanding the world around us. So, in a in a 3D environment, in an airspace, typically there are fewer obstacles. It would be really great as a vehicle provider if there was air traffic control on the 405, and we made sure that everybody knew exactly where they were supposed to be driving and at what speed and when they could merge. But the reality is we don't have that. And I think as we start to add more and more airborne vehicles, it'll be interesting to see how that evolves, whether we end up with this concept of air traffic control for everybody, or whether we expect that to fall on the operator, whether that falls on the pilot, so to speak. Is sort of how those responsibilities are assigned with a much larger number of vehicles than we have now in the air.
There are actually multiple privatized or enterprise air traffic services. Amazon has its own. Google has its own called Wing. They spun out of Google X. And they have licenses by the FAA to do what they call LANC, or kind of a beyond visual line of sight unmanned traffic management in certain jurisdictions around the country. There are existing centers of excellence in places like Reno, Nevada, North Carolina, that are piloting these projects and have approval from FAA to do these testing since years ago. So, yeah.
Monica, let me ask you then, when are we going to see some of the cool things you're doing? And in addition to having a flying car, we're also going to have our own satellites in the future, individually.
Wow, I'm actually working on that. I'm not sure. We're probably going to see the flying car first before we each have our own satellites. We're launching by end of this year. There are several other new space launch providers already up and running around the world. So we're seeing increase of launch capacity in the next couple years globally. We're also seeing a whole slew of new space activities, where I was at the largest small sat conference in Utah, of all places, in August. So local in Utah, they've been running a small sat conference for the last 30 years. Started as some professors and a few students go, this is really cool, we're gonna do a small sat conference, a few people. Now you're looking at thousands of people going to Utah once a year in August. And typically when I go to these space conferences, I see people like here, business people, engineers. The last couple of years, I have these little kids, 10 to 13-year-old, coming by the booth. And naturally, I'm intrigued. I'm like, hi, what are you doing here? They go, oh, we just want to pick up your stuff. I go, no, like, what are you doing here at this conference, this technical business conference? They go, oh, we built a satellite for NASA. These 10 to 13-year-olds built a little CubeSat. We're doing an experiment. And then they proceeded to tell me the experiment in doing that. When I was doing that, something about radiation flipping a bit. So we want computer result up in space and compare it down on the ground and figuring out the radiation effect on electronics. So I did that 5 years out of college here at TRW. And these kids are 10 to 13. So I think the future's not far from now.
They're doing that here in the South Bay?
They are a group of students called the Weiss School. I think they're in Florida. But there are several similar programs in the country that are starting. So they're the youngest I've seen is 10-year-old building CubeSats and launching them.
The reality is you don't need to go into the level of quality systems that very complicated satellite systems used to be. And now, one of our companies that just graduated from our cohort, came out of MIT, moved here to El Segundo for the last 13 weeks to be accelerated, is developing processor boards that are becoming, to standardize them so that you just treat them like Legos and you plug and play them into what do you want your satellite to do. And you can put it into something the size of this water bottle and give it to Monica and she'll launch it for you.
That's
probably for
cool.
free because they're doing university educational stuff too.
Yeah.
I had the privilege of, when this opportunity came up, there was no way I was going to miss it, and that was, fly the Concorde when it was flying. It had just started service out of Miami and flew subsonic from Miami to Washington, D.C., and then supersonic Washington, D.C. to London, and going twice the speed of sound as fast as a rifle bullet across the ocean. Monica, maybe you can tell us about when people will be able to experience the space tourism that's being talked about now.
Oh, space tourism, that's now. So Virgin Galactic has more than 600 people already paid and waiting in line, some as long as 10, 13, 15 years to actually go to space. They have this huge backlog. We're looking at starting operation from Spaceport America next year. So once this gets up and going, then the 600 people go first. There's several countries interested as well. So Virgin Galactic is building several more spaceships. So you can buy a ticket today, and just waiting.
First class, business.
They're all first class. Yeah.
Economy. I think I need
It's
economy.
actually first class.
What am I talking about? Only first class. Like on the Concorde, it was unbelievable. Now, I see you have the 747s in service. Obviously, they're not making those anymore, right? So what's the plan down the line?
That's a nice part about it. There's a really healthy second-hand 747 market. There are tons of them. There are plenty, and they're cheap.
Who knew? Yeah, no, that's great.
Yeah, so we're okay. We're good.
Yeah.
And
Let me ask you a serious question now. Since we're used to having news-driven conversations, obviously the CEO of Boeing was in Washington today and was drawing heavy criticism for what happened to the 737 MAX jetliners, which are still grounded. And the question of regulation came up, whether the FAA should take a more aggressive role in regulating Boeing. What about regulation and your thoughts about regulation as it relates to what you guys are doing? Too much, too little?
that's such a heavy subject. For space, it depends a bit too much. For business, from business perspective, I understand a lot of regulation, something called ITAR, stemmed from back in the Cold War era. There's a lot of restriction put on a space company in the United States for export compliance, where if you were to start a rocket company in, say, Europe or India, they don't have the similar type of restriction. So that's for one. But I believe the U.S. government has been working on that ITAR restriction to create a more business-friendly environment and help us be more competitive on the international marketplace. So from that perspective, we would love to see a little less.
I guess most of the regulators I'm familiar with tend to think of it as performance regulation. So they're really right-sizing where they need to be that involved or policing of those types of activities. But I think there is an evolution from the regulator in how are you mindful of the safety nature whilst allowing them to continue to bring those kinds of capabilities into the airspace. What's different is this kind of product development and R&D that's traditionally been managed in these siloed government contractor type environments that's now starting to happen in a devolved nature on the outside. So the regulator is trying to, not just being blanket closed door, they're actually treating these new entrepreneurs that are coming out of top universities, spinning out of big companies to say, if you are doing something, we are interested in working with you. And there's an electric aircraft company in Hawthorne called Ampere sitting between Tesla and SpaceX that is working very closely hand in hand with the FAA, and they're probably on the frontier of getting type certification approval to fly electric aircraft in the skies, and they've been doing it out of Camarillo and other places, and it's really exciting to see.
Looking ahead to the future, of course, various municipalities who are represented here today with mayors here in the audience and so forth, all of them are not friendly, for example, to scooters. Beverly Hills has banned them, for example. Do you see, as things evolve here, that cities might ban flying cars, or, as far as the local regulations are concerned, what challenges do you see ahead? Phillip.
I think the question of, I think the scooter question is a really interesting one, that on one hand that there are municipalities that are kind of taking the initial sort of knee-jerk reaction to ban them, but on the other hand, there are a lot of municipalities that are trying to they understand that they really do solve a problem, that everybody who's on a scooter is somebody who's not stuck in traffic, they're using less energy, they're taking up less space. So there's lots of, in San Francisco, there's a lot of work to try to make the cooperation between scooter providers and the municipality stronger, to make sure that they are solving, that they're solving better problems and more important problems. So I think that some jurisdictions and municipalities may try, but the reality is if these technologies are solving a problem, that they will eventually, I think they'll eventually prevail.
The disruptive nature that most companies used to take is kind of not really going to fly anymore, pun intended. But I really think there's a lot of, how do you actually start to have that conversation to say, we know this is happening? I remember when everyone was, Barbara and I talked about it around Airbnb in the city, paying the penalties for the cities would impose on people that weren't putting taxes in place or including various fees was worth it for the people that actually put their properties on Airbnb. So how can you actually create a more engaging dialogue with the regulator, with the city, to digitize where scooters are being parked, where are the cars? There's a wave of that many other companies that are starting to transform our thinking of how we are starting to move, and that's just the newest version of a lot more things that will be surprising you and getting you excited over the next few years.
Van, what kind of startup companies are you looking for, space and defense companies? What technologies, what's the next thing that you're looking for?
So everybody thinks just because, yeah, there are supersonic jet startups, there are rocket launch startups, there are satellite startups, flying car startups, and they always find us, but I'm actually really interested in the companies that are selling to other sectors that don't know how to sell to this industry. So if you're using autonomy or AI or sensors, robotics to enhance, so we had a company doing image recognition on MRI machines to detect various things in hard-to-read areas that were darker. And they didn't realize the dual-use capability in using that for remote sensing for satellite imagery, for SAR, for example, which is an acronym for synthetic aperture radar, which allows antennas to see through clouds and at night. That is becoming commercialized now. And that AI capability for image recognition was very interesting to me. Somebody else is doing fatigue monitoring for truck drivers. That's super valuable for me to take to the air traffic controllers and pilots unions and help them work with the airlines in terms of piloting those capabilities in other domains. So I'm actually interested in the ideas that you are familiar with, that you don't know where the applications are in the world that's often considered to be a black box, which is not necessarily true anymore. So please, if you have any cool innovations that are happening in your sector, I'd love to learn about it.
Terrific. And Phillip, what about you? What technologies would you like to hear about or connect with, and companies and startups that you'd like to connect with here?
Yeah, I think that for us, obviously, the machine learning, computer vision, AI space is something that is very exciting. We can solve a lot of problems that we might not have even known we had a few years ago, whether it's for example, approaching a vehicle with heavy packages and having the door open automatically is a problem that can be solved that way. So anyone, I would echo kind of what Van said, anyone who has solutions to problems that apply to ground transportation, we're interested as well.
Monica, what about you? Is Virgin Orbit looking for folks here that have a certain expertise or technologies that you see a use for in the future?
Well, there's so much. We're a pretty vertically integrated company, but we work very close with several of the local suppliers. But I think what I'm looking, so I think from the supply chain side, we're okay for now. But I think what I'm really hoping to see, though, similar to what Van is saying, we are at an interesting position where we get to see all kind of innovation in space, because they either come in looking for a quote for a launch, or they will come in looking for some sort of investment from Richard Branson. Either way, we get to see pretty cool or interesting or weird ideas. I think the use case and the business case that's needed to sustain the growth of this industry is still in progress, still needs to be found. The utilization of the large communication constellation like a Starlink launched by Elon and several other companies is pretty obvious. But I think the utilization of space data with all these infrastructure now going up into space and becoming more mature, I'm actually looking forward to collaborate and work with, like Vince said, if you have any idea how a lot of the industry who are not currently relying on space but can actually make use of the space data infrastructure, that's what I'm most interested in.
Let me ask you about some of the technology. You had mentioned the 3D technology being used to make rockets and rocket parts, but what about taking 3D printers with you on the way to Mars, for example? And obviously you can't come home to make spare parts, but I thought one of the most interesting things I've ever heard was the idea of taking the 3D printer with you as you head out like the Star Trek Enterprise did.
Yeah, that's actually one of the themes I'm most excited about, is the notion of additive manufacturing in space. Think of it exponentially, whether it's the old Death Star concept from Star Wars, but imagine 3D printers building 3D printer parts, and that is exponentially changing how we're creating swarm formations of satellites that can do things in a much larger way to see things that we can't, and that's already happening. Years ago, Made in Space secured its first funding contract to build its first tool for astronauts on the space station. And they are now developing many new capabilities to manufacture in space for Northrop Grumman and many other prime contractors that are continuing to look at more bolder type ideas that are not just for the defense industry, but for the commercial sector now. And I think there's like 5 competing private space station companies as the ISS is looking to be retired by 2024? 4 or
5 now, yeah.
Is 3D technology a big deal for you two?
Yeah, we definitely use a lot of 3D printing technology for design and development, prototyping. It's starting to become important. If we look at lightweighting and crashworthiness, there are a lot of things that we can do with 3D printing that can produce parts that will do things that can't be made by other manufacturing methods. So that's probably the most exciting application for the automotive industry.
What about you, Monica? For the 747, are they using 3D printers?
Not for 747, but for rockets for sure.
Yep.
We actually have one of the largest 3D additive subtractives, a mouthful to say, metal 3D printing machine in the world. It's a collaboration with DMG Mori and a collaboration with NASA Marshall. So we're definitely looking at utilizing 3D printing technology to lower the cost and improve the quality and the speed of building rocket parts.
We are at an institution of higher learning here at Cal State University, Dominguez Hills, so let's talk about that and what do you see as necessary for educating the future workforce, preparing the folks here on this campus for the jobs that you have now and for the jobs of the future?
I am a proud alumni of the Cal State University system.
How about that? I didn't even know that. Wow.
I did not expect to be where I am today, nor did I ever imagine I'd be helping entrepreneurs shake up the economics of our industry. But I am very pleased to be here this evening and support the conversations we heard about economic development and sharing with you some of the incredible stories we're seeing from these entrepreneurs from around the world that are moving here to the South Bay to participate in the incredible growth of our sector that's unprecedented. It's not just Menlo Park VCs in the Valley that are capitalizing on these growth opportunities. I had a Venice Beach bro seed fund, a satellite imagery company just a few months ago. So that trend is continuing to expand, and it's certainly an exciting time, and we look forward to working with the educational system to bring more and more of the talent to support. I remind everyone, Southern California is the largest concentration of aerospace engineering talent. coupled with the business talent here where it's a no-brainer to come and start your company. So I think we are here for that reason, and we will continue to stay here.
Phillip, your guidance for the up-and-comers?
I think I'm probably pretty old school in this way, and I think that it's, for me, strong fundamentals are always important, and people who get a great background that way always will set them up for success. I think also what's important is maybe what happens outside the classroom and being exposed to all the great companies and all the great opportunities that exist in this area. Kind of opens people's eyes and opens people's minds that they might, they might want to participate in something like this, or to maybe start their own company as well. So I think that kind of fostering that entrepreneurial startup spirit is also very important.
Terrific. And Monica, I suspect you might recommend engineering, but what are your thoughts on education?
I think we need both. I mean, I started as an engineering student, and I started working in the space industry before I graduated at USC. And that's because TRW had an exceptional internship co-op program. I agree. I think it's very important to get that collaboration between industry and academia early on, so the students will have an opportunity to experience real-world projects, and also that the researchers can really work hand in hand with the industry folks. I think not only, I mean, this is kind of the testament to this area of decades of development in aerospace, what Van's mentioning, we have the largest workforce. Just yesterday, I had a CEO from a Japanese space company, and after touring our factory, his first question was, how do you hire all these people? I mean, it is not true everywhere else. As I'm going around the world helping them build ecosystem, I realize there isn't always that connection between their university and their industry, which is really nascent, which is really impeding the growth of that particular industry. So I think that's important.
All right, let me ask this before we turn the questions over to the audience. As far as hiring and as far as the economy is concerned, how would you assess things? Any sign of a downturn in your sector here, and are you guys hiring? Van?
I like to date before I get married, so I offer a lot of internships. If you know anyone that wants to kind of sit at that nexus of business and the aerospace industry, then I'm definitely interested in learning. Yeah, we're always hiring. We are a very tribal family. I think we're about 50 people in 8 countries now. And it's a weird time. The Department of Defense and the national security apparatus is very intrigued by what's happening in the commercial sector, in particular on the space front, and thanks to the success of companies like Virgin and many more. Next week, we are hosting with the new Secretary of the Air Force what we're calling Space Pitch Day, which is another attempt at how the DoD will continue to tap into the commercial sector for what they're calling rapid acquisition. So how they are basically saying entrepreneurs and startups are faster at productizing than traditional government vendors, but rather than supersede that process, how do they create a parallel track that gives them the gates to come through and work quickly into warfighter programs? So I see the economy bright for our sector, and we're going to continue to support that in demystifying what's happening in the commercial sector for the national security framework.
Speaking of which, the creation of the Space Force, is that having an impact on your business and this region?
I think Olena's giving me a dirty look from the distance on that side. There has been, Congressman Liu and Congressman Calvert launched something called the Aerospace Caucus, California Aerospace Caucus, in order to preserve and protect the assets that exist at SMC, which is very sensitive to what is happening with regards to the consolidation of many space warfighter units that support not just the Air Force, the Navy, and other branches of the government, but many people forget the Army is actually one of the biggest users of space, and a lot of that infrastructure is in Alabama, and there's a lot of politics behind that. But I think Space Force exists. It's just rebranding it with existing assets.
Phillip.
I think in terms of a slowdown we've seen the last 20 months that we've been in existence, been generally very robust. Candidates are usually optimistic. They believe that they have lots of opportunities, and we have to present them. We have to present them with a good one. So I think in terms of sort of that the perceived volatility. I think in general, people believe that they've got that they have lots of options. I hope that continues. It's good for the economy in general. I think candidates continue to be optimistic.
Monica, you have the helpline sign up there, and what's your view on the economy and your business at the moment?
Wow, business is great. I'm tracking closely the space economy in particular, and we're still seeing growth. We're still seeing investment coming in. In fact, I'm seeing an accelerated pace of international capital being deployed, and international governments starting to pay more attention to space program. While U.S. and Europe has been doing this for a while and more mature, we're seeing really the rest of the world starting to coming up. They really have their own ambition, their own dreams, and they're supporting it. So I think from that view that I can see for the next 5 years or so, it's going pretty strong.
And are you hiring?
We are. We've grown from 200-something people 2 years ago. Now we have 550 now, including contractors. So we've grown a lot very quickly, mostly because we shifted from R&D into production mode. We are still hiring, not as fast, but for good people, especially we continue to look for a more diverse workforce. So definitely still are, and an internship.
Engineers primarily?
Across the board, actually. Supply chain, business folks, legal, across the board.
We're going to turn the questioning over to the audience now. Once again, we have the microphone set to go. So for our panel of tech experts, do we have a question for the panel now? And we do have a couple of questions here, so we can mobilize the microphones. Let's shoot them in that direction there, please. Why don't we start with the closest one? There you go. Go right ahead.
So being in sales and driving all over Los Angeles County, I'm really excited about a vehicle that I don't have to drive. It drives itself, and I could do other things. And I know that our friend from the South Bay Economic Institute, Jose, driving all the way from Corona would enjoy something like that as well. But I have a few questions. Realistically, how long will it take so that a vehicle be totally automated, so I don't have to drive and I can multitask and do other things? I'm also excited about being George Jetson and actually have a flying vehicle, but I assume that I would need a driver's, pilot's license. But what's my biggest fear is the bad actors that will try to get into the systems and compromise these vehicles and cause havoc to the roads. So those are my questions.
You want to do the RAND study?
Go for it.
Many of you may know that RAND did a study a couple years ago.
Yeah.
I thought it was really interesting. They basically said having an imperfect autonomous vehicle would save more lives than waiting for the perfection of autonomy to actually roll out across the streets.
Yeah, we said the same thing when we started with electrification, and we decided that in many cases it was better to have hybrid vehicles that used less fuel than to wait for full battery electrics. We think that just like any technology, there are cases which are easier to deploy than others. And I think the question is maybe not only when autonomy will solve every problem, but when it solves a meaningful subset of problems and it actually presents a real benefit. And we think that obviously that will be much sooner than complete.
There was another study that, there was another study that did a story on the chess game of Deep Blue beating the world's smartest chess player. I think it was Kasparov or something.
Kasparov.
Yeah. And how there was a competition years later where they put the most powerful AI capability with the smartest chess players who lost to two guys with laptops that had an average autonomous kind of layer between them. And it was all about the processes they put between them. They call it human-computer symbiosis, which is essentially how do you optimize the best of both rather than trying to automate the human. What do you actually allow each to be good at what it's best good for? And I think that's some principles that are being heavily considered in all of our worlds.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We have another question from the audience. This one right over here, please.
Hi, good afternoon. Phillip, can you speak to how your team plans to building out your EV infrastructure or how charging is going to take place with a subscription model?
Yeah, so I think we continue to see pretty robust growth in the public charging infrastructure. We plan to work with the charging partners that are already available. We're looking to make that easier and to make it simple to select the largest variety of charging options that are possible. I think that Los Angeles, we're very lucky. We have probably the most robust EV charging infrastructure in the country. We plan to give everybody the easiest access to that as we can.
We have another question here, and while we're getting the microphone, by a show of hands, how many of you have an electric vehicle now? Oh, the numbers are growing. Okay.
So with autonomous vehicles, I think we're trying to solve several problems, which is, one is traffic, and the other is pollution, and there's the cultural habits. How are you going to get people to ride share? Because only when we ride share are we going to cut the traffic. Otherwise, we're just going to have more vehicles, And so how do we work with governments? Because it is going to take some incentives to get people out of their cars. And how are we going to do that?
Get people out of their cars and into planes?
Or into shared vehicles, shared ride.
Yeah, I mean, I think for many of us, anything that saves us time and or money, we would see as a value. And if there's a way to deliver one or ideally both of those, I think people will see that as an alternative that makes sense. So whether we are flying over the 405 instead of being stuck on it, or we're operating, we're operating vehicles that are less expensive but still very convenient, I think both of those things are enticing.
Mm-hmm. Next question. Let's jump on the microphone right over here, please. Okay, one there, and then that'll be the next one. Go right ahead.
Hello. My question is for Monica. With regard to space hotels and the Virgin Orbit, what is the largest capacity that the 737 would be able to carry and launch into space?
Okay. Two different questions: space hotel and launch.
Well, retrofitted space hotels, if you will.
Let's see. So the current system, Cosmic Girl and Launcher 1 system, we can carry 300 to 500 kilogram into lower Earth orbit. The space hotels that's being built right now, they are much larger infrastructure, so they have to utilize a larger rocket to actually transport the parts up there to be built. But you never know. I mean, we may be able to build lower Earth orbit infrastructures. And part of it comes down to that in-space manufacturing capability. So we can take bits and pieces and printers up there eventually. There's this company called Made in Space, and they are partnering with NASA right now to create in-space manufacturing printing capability. So that way you don't have to spend so much money and energy to send something large pieces up. You can actually use smaller rocket to send smaller pieces up. And that hopefully within the next 5 to 10 years, I think.
Thanks for asking about that. And tell us more about the concept of a space hotel. And do you have any partners? Will it be a Holiday Inn or a Four Seasons?
We don't have one yet, although that might be a good concept for me to start working on.
There you go.
There are people working, I think Axiom and a few other startup companies are the ones Van mentioned that are working on replacing the soon-to-be retired International Space Station. And several of them that I know of, they do have the concept. Their business plan includes operating a commercial hotel resort type of setup to help fund in conjunction of scientific activities. So that's already in the plans, and they fundraised.
Very interesting. We have another question here with the microphone. Go right ahead.
Hi, yeah. This question is generally for Mr. Weicker, but I guess it's kind of a general panel question. Just because as we move more towards like the commercialization of these industries, when you guys look at something like user interface, is there like a specific realm you kind of work within? Like where does it intersect with like safety and design? Like as far as like a autonomous car, or eventually like, you know, people buying tickets to like go to space?
Yeah, I think that if you look at our views on in-car user experience, we didn't really talk about this too much with the video that we showed, but I think our view has generally been to diverge significantly from the idea of more screens and more touch interfaces in the car. We're actually focusing on a very sparse user interface. We want to control a number of functions which are maybe not related directly to driving the vehicle from your smartphone, which is the screen that you're already familiar with and that you trust to do lots of things, maybe unlock your house or control your music at home or access any number of other services that you have. I think that we look at, there are a lot of good technology products that exist now with a very simple user interface. I think the smart speaker concept is a very good one. There's no screen, there's no touch interface, you just talk to it. It's undeniably something that's high tech, but it's not something that's obtrusive. Typically, car designers and car dashboards, we love switches and buttons. People have historically wanted, no offense, they wanted it to look like the space shuttle. But I think we're going in a very different direction and trying to simplify that experience. In terms of, let's say, the out-of-car user experience, we think that we would like that to be, as simple. I think you can pretty much order anything you want, whether it's a ride to the airport or pizza or whatever. You can order that with your phone, and we think that that would be the central point for managing your subscription to the vehicle and all the touch points that you need to have would start from there.
Next question from the audience.
Yeah, hi. The question to Van, like you were just talking about the flying bikes. So, how does they plan with the traffic controls? Because even with the roads, like there are like a lot of clash happening. Even with if we drive with all the traffic rules, how does that is planned with the traffic controls?
Yeah. Don't just take your flight and go wherever you want. That's part of the education. You don't have to get your pilot's license anymore, but there is this kind of middle area of how you start to become familiar with the rules and protocol. Even if you buy a DJI drone today, there is certain protocol you have to understand. People are going to Venice Beach, flying their drones at the pier, not real, and their system is telling them this is a restricted flight area, but they're still saying ignore. And they're flying these things illegally in restricted airspace in the flight path. So there is a significant learning curve in educating. I think when the FAA opened up their drone pilots registration portal, it like blew away the amount of users in like 1 month that registered, tens of thousands, to what is even possible with the amount of people, aircraft and pilots that are in the workforce today. A really scary indicator of just anybody learning to fly must be must have some elementary introduction to what it means to fly in that environment. And yeah, I would, at the moment, there's like if you fly out of Santa Monica Airfield, there's something called visual flight rules where you have to just be told what to be mindful of and then look out for yourself. And I think there will be some middle area where you will have to work with some kind of enterprise solution that's telling you there's other aircraft around you. Yeah.
In the meantime, you want to watch out for the scooters on the sidewalk, sir. Right?
Someone parking their own flying taxi.
Yeah.
Yeah.
flying on the sidewalk right now.
Yeah, there's about 70 different flying car companies in the US right now. Yeah. That are with experimental licenses flying around. Yeah.
Okay, so when? I know are they secretly flying around here? Because I haven't seen one yet. When are we going to see it?
You can Google it right now. There's something called Opener, Black Sky. There's Larry Page's one called Kitty Hawk. There's the most famous one that Uber was working with called Joby. They're up in Santa Cruz. They're pretty stealth. But Uber Elevate has a big initiative, and last year at the Skirball Center, they actually hosted their second annual Elevate conference to demonstrate how they're thinking about autonomy of the skies through electrification of aircraft. How we move is really changing. So I'm really excited. Yeah, I mean, you can see them. Yeah, they're all online, but they're not going to be flying right in front of you. If they're going to be in the urban environment right now, they're starting with helicopters.
You said over the 405.
Those are piloted helicopters.
Oh, okay.
Robinson aircraft. But they're slowly going to introduce layers of autonomy, and then they'll adopt the aircraft that are being type certified to be allowed to be flown. Yeah.
All right, I mentioned at the beginning that I'm kind of a space geek myself, and let me ask you this. What rocket is used when someone is fired in the aerospace business? Does anybody know that? A dismissal. Dismissal. And we've reached that point, ladies and gentlemen. The afternoon has flown by at an incredible speed. So please join me in thanking our tech panel, Van, Phillip, and Monica. An exceptional lineup of speakers, and to all of the great speakers from the economic panel we had, thank you again very, very much. And we've certainly learned a lot today, and now it's time to enjoy ourselves a bit and continue the networking downstairs. Just a reminder that today's South Bay Economic Forecast Report will be available tomorrow on the Cal State University Dominguez Hills website. And now we proceed downstairs to the Palm Courtyard for the complimentary craft beer and wine tasting reception. It is wine o'clock, so please keep your name badges on, and they are your entrance to the reception. On behalf of everyone here today, thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen, for your attention, and we'll see you downstairs. Thank you very, very much.